Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Maybank's Invest ASEAN webinar program on renewables, energy security, and the low-carbon economy. For today's show, it is the third lineup in our ESG series. Following our first round of conversations with Dr. Tonsi Whelan from NYU Stern School of Business on calculating sustainability ROI, and a second round with Dato Amy, Maybank Investment Bank CEO, on championing diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI in short. This morning's programming will focus on how renewable energy, energy security, and a low-carbon economy are closely intertwined, and how business leaders look at energy transition, in particular their strategic approach towards ESG implementation. On today's panel, we are privileged to have with us Encik Yusrizal Muhammad Yusof, MD of TNB Renewables Berhad. We have Encik Muhammad Irwan Asman, Head of Sustainability Sarawak Energy Berhad. We have Raj Kumar Zain, Head of Business Development, Adani Energy Green Limited. And last but not least, Titipon Jurapon Siridi, CFO of Global Power Synergy Public Company. I'm now delighted to turn the mic over to my colleague, Ms. Wong Chu-Han, who is Maybank's ASEAN Head of Equity Research, to moderate this session from here on. Chu-Han, over to you.
Thank you so much, Singal. A very good morning to all. We are indeed honored to have with us this morning an esteemed panel of industry experts from across ASEAN and Asia to share with us their perspectives on the topic of renewables, energy security, and the low-carbon economy. Now, we look forward to learning all about how we can turn today's challenges into tomorrow's opportunities and, of course, winners. Allow me to begin by framing this morning's discussion. Now, renewable energy, energy security, and low-carbon economy are closely intertwined, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Each piece has its role in completing the full picture. Energy security is a term used to connect national security and the availability of natural resources for energy generation and consumption. Now, in recent times, with the challenge of climate change taking center stage, the concept of energy security has been refined to the provision of reasonably priced, reliable, and environmentally friendly energy. Russia's invasion of Ukraine highlights the importance of mechanisms to safeguard our region's security of supply. High oil prices put significant strains on consumers and the broader economy. Focusing on ASEAN, the market turbulence has shone a spotlight on energy security vulnerabilities of the Asian countries and their mechanisms in place to weather supply disruption. We have been an aggregate oil importer since the middle of 1990s, and we are forecasted to become a net natural gas importer by 2025. That's about 3 years away. Now, to uplift the livelihood of the people in this region, not only must energy security be achieved, it must also be accompanied by efforts in a host of other initiatives, for example, intervention, perhaps even legislation to drive a more efficient use of energy by industries, corporates, and the individual households, and a change in consumer behavior, lifestyle choices, and mindsets, among others. Asian countries are committed to cutting greenhouse gas emissions and reducing reliance on fossil fuels. The Malaysian government, for example, has set a goal of reducing carbon intensity by 2030. The Prime Minister has said that a comprehensive national energy policy will be introduced and cleaner electricity generation will be implemented through the operations of several gas power plants to replace coal-fired power plants. By 2025, renewable energy generation in this country or Malaysia from solar, biomass, and biogas is targeted to increase to 31% of the total installed capacity compared to about 23% presently. So with this backdrop, let's dive right into our discussion this morning. Now to our panelists, the first question is, how have thoughts on energy security and transition to renewables changed over the past 2 years with black swan events like the pandemic and now the war, which have led to very high fossil fuel prices currently?
Chuhan,
yeah, hi.
if I may start, yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today, esteemed panelists, esteemed guests, ladies, gentlemen, and thank you, Maybank, for organizing this. I think it's timely and it's very important that we try to discuss and have a conversation on this. What happened in the past 2 years, I think, has put or shed some light to us on the vulnerability of the energy prices. And before I go too far, I think I'd like to share, in planning of a electricity supply system, 3 main components are being looked at, or the balancing act trying to balance these 3 main components. Number 1, obviously, is the economics, the affordability of the energy prices. Number 2 is the reliability of supply, ensuring the supply is available, robust, and able to meet customers' demand. And number 3, last but not least, is the environment, which has been lately becoming more and more important. People are putting more and more focus to it. So these 3 main components needs to be balanced. Ensuring affordability, especially in this region, with most countries are either in advanced developing countries or the likes of Singapore, already a developed country. So energy cost plays a very large part in the economy. So making sure that we are able to have a very affordable or competitive energy cost ensures that the economy can continue to grow. So as we can see, this plays well. I think in the current situation, you see quite high fossil fuel prices, and obviously renewables, especially solar in this region, will be able to balance that. However, one key component which we need also to pay attention is how to make sure that having this intermittent or variable renewables, we are able to ensure the reliability of the supply. So as we go, I think countries, especially countries in ASEAN, looking at balancing all these 3, which is good. And I think in the near future, we are going to talk about the contribution of energy storage becoming more and more important to balance this variability in the system. So I think for a start, I'll stop there and open it up for other panelists.
Hi, this is Raj.
Yeah.
Thanks, Maybank, for providing this opportunity. It's a great forum to discuss the issues which the ASEAN particularly is facing. I think it is very important to understand, and my colleague, industry friend, has rightly highlighted this, is that when we look at renewables or energy, I would rather say, the affordability and availability becomes very, very important contours of it. The last 2 years, 2.5 years, where we saw COVID and where we saw the recent issues with respect to geopolitics and the resultant increase in the energy prices for conventional sources of energy, has only strengthened the objective of moving towards more sustainable energy, which is basically more affordable. I believe in most countries in the world now, including the most of the ASEAN countries, you have RE moving below the grid parity. So I think from that perspective, adoption of renewables has helped. And this period of 2.5 years, where we have seen all these issues, which from the conventional sources of energy has only strengthened the idea around deploying large-scale renewables. We need to find ways, we need to find methods to ensure that this renewable energy is available in each of the country. Each country has their own different formula to adopt it. I can talk about India. India obviously has large resources of solar and wind. So it is easy for India to deploy those resources in a large clip every year. That's the reason we are third or fourth largest market globally when it comes to renewable. And that solution is different for every country. Some country may look at doing offshore more, some country may look at doing wind more. So each country will have their own specifics. And I think from that perspective, it has to be done. But what is very important, which has got highlighted now, is the inhibitions around renewables, or this being a very new thing for, I would say, Asia, where we are talking about last 5, 6 years of history. Now we have to see that how do we change our mindset around adopting this, forget about, or I would rather say adopt it with its nature of variability, and look at that how do we handle that variability. I believe in most cases in Asia right now, it is in the nascent stage where this variability does not necessarily make a big difference. But there are solutions as when we are talking about storage, when we are also mixing it with gas consumption, when we are mixing it with hydro consumption. So all of that, if you do, then this issue of variability can be addressed. But when it comes to low cost, affordable energy, I think there is no second answer to it, except probably some cases you can do hydro, but hydro has its own implications. So I think what has happened in the last 2 years is we are looking at large-scale deployment of renewables becoming more and more important. Just think of a world where you had an additional 50 gigawatt of renewables being deployed in the last 2.5 years, which did not happen because of COVID. The current issue which we see in terms of high prices of energy would have been addressed with that kind of energy being available from sustainable sources. So I think it is only pushing that we need to deploy large-scale capacity. There is the deployment of it in terms of large resources being available, land resources being available, transmission resources being available. And that is where I think companies like us have been working hard to deploy 5 to 10 gigawatts a year and having that capability. So that is what is becoming more and more apparent.
Yeah, this is Titipong from GPSC, right? I would agree with these two gentlemen, right, regarding the balancing of the three factors, like the affordability, right, the environmental, and also the liabilities. I probably share from like the Thai context, right? So as you probably aware that like for Thailand as a country, right, we have some kind of reserve margins in terms of the power in the past, right? So previously, right, we probably talk a lot more about the renewable sources. How can we achieve that kind of net zero, right? But recently, right, with the the tension right in Russia, Ukraine, right, the security issues, I mean the power security issues become like more and more important, especially when you look at the supply chain, not only from like the fossil-based power view, right? But when you look at the renewable sources, we pretty much rely on some sources of like PV module, like from China, from some like certain countries. And once that's kind of hit up in that kind of supply chain, that probably slow the pace of the development, right, in the renewable sectors, right? But I do agree that in the longer term, like renewable sources, right, still important part, right, to achieve net zero and to achieve a better environment in the futures. Anyhow, currently, I think most of the private sector like GPSC, right? We need to reconsider or like try to rebalance our portfolio, right? In probably in the short to medium term, right? How can we balancing all these jigsaws right, together, so at the end we could achieve our target, right, in the longer term. With that, right, for example, in Thailand, right, beside the renewable sources, it's not just like the generation itself, right? We need to look at the supply chain. So that's why PTT Group, like as the national oil company here in Thailand, right? As a group, we like to strengthen the ecosystem of these renewable sources. That's why we decided, right, to take part in that EV car supply chain, so we can create not only the generation but also the demand at the same time. So by having both like demand and supply side management, hopefully we could build the ecosystem, right, to promote that renewable sources.
Yeah. Johan, you need to unmute.
Sorry, Eran, from your Sarawak Energy's perspective, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, thank you, Maybank, for inviting us and with this distinguished panelists here. So I think for Sarawak Energy, perspective of Sarawak Energy, if you talk about renewable energy, if you talk about net zero, we need to look at holistically what's our role, where are we, and what our role, how we can make an impact. Definitely, the pandemic and what we are facing today is basically accelerating renewable energy adaptation. The issue here is cost of transition. That's the key words if you talk about renewable energy. So there must be a holistic way to look at it, integrated way to look at it, to bring the cost of transition down so that it meet all the requirements as mentioned earlier by earlier panelists. Talk about security, costs, affordable costs, and so on. So again, all of this is basically, we should align it toward our nation journey toward net zero. Everything needs to be holistic, not only on the supply side, but also on the demand side, responsible production and consumption as well, that need to be looked at as well. And then the role of other low carbon technology or low carbon generation, we need to look at it. Every technology have its own benefits or have its own advantage. So that need to be properly understand how that can be integrate with other, as J. Yuzal mentioned about variable renewable energy, that need to be understand. So I think that's the points that I would like to share. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think the keywords that we have gathered from the discussion is actually definitely the last 2 years the backdrop has shifted a bit, and it actually bears and it bring to front the issue on energy security and affordability as well as availability. Those are, I guess, the keywords. Now, moving on to the next question, let's take a look at the key drivers for change, because clean technology alone will not be sufficient to effect long-lasting change on a scale which is big enough to limit global warming. I just want to quote from the International Energy Agency, which said in a recent interview on the energy outlook for Southeast Asia that initiatives from individuals, civil society, companies, and investors can all make a difference, but the greatest capacity to shape our region's energy destiny lies with the governments, all right, the authorities. So what is your response to this statement from the IEA? Where do you see the greatest capacity for change in your industry, all right, or in your country or in your economy? And what would make the biggest difference for you? Perhaps maybe we can start with Injek Yusrizal.
Yeah, thanks again, Johan. I think one of the important component, if we looked at in terms of renewables generation, as mentioned earlier, was the intermittency. I mean, obviously, ASEAN region being very close to the equator, we are, in a region of a very low wind speed. Since you have a very stable temperature, you're looking at less wind movements. Hence, for a commercially viable wind potential at this current technological advancement, we are only looking at, some location from Vietnam to the north for it to be, commercially viable for wind developments. Hence, most of ASEAN countries are only going to be looking at solar as the main renewables, plus the other, mini hydro and all the biogas, biomass segments. So with that being said, I think what also need to happen is if we look at Europe, European continent, they are very successful, obviously, in terms of deploying renewables. They do have both wind and solar, despite the fact that people could argue the solar irradiation in the Europe is much less compared to what we have here. They are complementing solar with wind, so that's one important component. They do have a significant wind potential. And I believe there are, advances made or studies being conducted around this region by research bodies. I mean, within TNB Research Unit 10, we are looking at this potential as well, but it will take some time. So the second component which I wish to highlight that European continent has is actually the strongly interconnected electricity systems, which partly, I believe, enable for a large-scale deployment of renewables. So ASEAN, I think we've been talking about ASEAN interconnection, trying to connect from north to south, east to west, and Malaysia being at the Peninsular Malaysia as well as Sabah and Sarawak regions being at the center of ASEAN, obviously could play a very significant role in this. I think Peninsular Malaysia itself right now is connected to Thailand in the north, as well as to the Singapore in the south. Hence, the systems seem to be stronger with these interconnections. So I believe when we talk about government to government initiative, utility to utility initiative, this could play a big role in the future to enable higher penetration of renewable energy in ASEAN, within ASEAN. So,
right, thank you so much. So G to G, U to U, right? That's the key point coming from you. What about you, Mr. Raj? What are your thoughts?
No, I think the points mentioned by the fellow panelists are right in terms of the wind availability. It is much more scarce in this region compared to the rest of the world, I would say. But yes, like countries like India still have it, Sri Lanka has it, some parts of Vietnam has it. There are a few more regions where it is available. And I think it's question of really tapping it. Now, it is very important, and as mentioned, is that there should be a right mix of resources. Otherwise, we will see that the penetration actually gets constrained by only adopting solar, because then you need to adopt other things like storage or something. So I think pump hydro or hydro is another thing which is actually working. And I think that's where the role of various governments comes in per se, is that do they have that foresight actually today to not only look at how the potential storage coming from batteries will be there, but I think also look at what are their own individual resources. A country may have more of hydro, country may have more of wind, country may have some other alternative, or as has been mentioned, is can we have the entire ASEAN connected and also gain out of the one nation generating in the morning and other nation actually consuming that power. So all of that can actually help. So there are solutions available. I'm really optimistic about that the issue with respect to availability of resources can be addressed. Now, it's a question of governments taking that step, having that foresight, and actually enabling that policy infrastructure. Large corporates can actually help in devising those policies along with the government. And today, most of the governments are looking on their own nations in resources and infrastructure. So that's the initial part of it. And I think as all of us, each of the countries are able to tap their own individual resources and actually reach to a level where they really need to interconnect, I think that will happen. I think Singapore is a great example where we are looking at, okay, there is a very low adoption, but now at least they're happy to looking at connections going into Singapore from other parts of the world, so which can actually enable a transition towards green electricity. So I think the government's initiative around this, like in countries like India, it is also with respect to making the land available in time. Because I think that's another, in resource area, is another important aspect of adopting renewables at a large scale. So that's another thing which you would look from governments, and that's where people like large corporates actually look at de-risking that, and that's where people like Adani has that kind of resources available with them, where we can actually look at implementing significantly. So I think the right set with respect to 2 or 3 mix, whether the real combination is being adopted and there is a foresightness around how it will evolve, and actually thinking today with respect to storage, with respect to doing an hybrid project, with respect to doing a RTC project, which actually is mixing multiple things, not only RE, but also mixing it with pump storage or with the gas, or looking at interconnects, building a large infrastructure in terms of evacuation system within the country so that the country itself can balance. All of these are very important things which are there at the government level to actually adopt. So that is something that where you need a forward thinking from the government.
Right. Khun Titipon, your thoughts?
Yes, I would agree, right, with that. We need to have the transmission line connecting, right, within ASEAN. But it's not just only the connections, right? We need to have the regulation framework together, so we can aggregate all these renewable sources together to match the supply and demand, right? For example, like in Laos, currently they probably have like some more of the excess capacity from hydro, right? By Singapore, right, they probably like to import more of these renewable sources, right, from nearby countries. With this, right, Thailand and Malaysia probably play quite important role, right, in this grid connection. So we can integrate the whole region together. On top of that, right, in terms of the storage technologies at large, I just mentioned, right, there are a lot of like developments, right, in terms of the storage technologies, but probably there's not only like one solution for this, right? And as a private sector like PTT Group or GPSC, right, we could take part in this storage technology and development. As we did like in the past, we could like have some investment. We could promote this application. So at the end, right, we can enhancing the renewable sources in terms of the reliability. As we are aware that solar, wind, right, you could yield power for certain period, right? But for some sector of the customer or users, right, they like to have the reliability, and sometimes, right, the peak demand, it's not at the same time at the generation. So with this, right, hopefully we could bring in all these pieces together, and that would enhance the reliability of the renewable power sources.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Again, being the last one, I think most of the point been shared. So, but then again, it's okay. The way we look, for example, Sarawak Energy, the way we look ourselves in terms of impacts, looking at the statement from IEA, we are fully agree with that. everyone have their own role, be it the banks, be it the government, be it private sectors. We have our own role, just that we need to integrate that into one objective. Okay, be it the national objective or ASEAN objective, for example. For Sarawak Energy, I think the biggest impact is basically switching from thermal to renewable, which is coming from hydro. In 2000, we reduced our carbon intensity 72% from 2010 to as compared to 2020. That is a huge reduction in terms of carbon intensity. Of course, it's coming from hydropower. Yep, people are talking about hydropower. There's a legacy issue on hydropower, but it's important for industries to adopt international best practices, okay, toward sustainable energy. Of course, all this need to address the ESG part of it. So for Sarawak Energy, we're adopting International Hydropower Association standards in our development and operation as well. Looking at the other part of it, since we achieved 72% reduction from switching from thermal, coal and gas to hydro, what next? All right, I think Sarawak Energy, that's why we should not stop there. That's why we are signing to 1.5 degree C targets, so that we have another driver for us to push through in adaptation of other technology. For example, we also have pilot projects on floating solar, battery storage, hydrogens, and then even EVs in our fleets, as well as net metering as well. So all these are pilot projects for us to understand how to scale up all this in the future. Because we already have the basis, the fundamental, the foundation, which is coming from RE. Looking forward, because this is aligned with Sarawak Energy vision to become the regional battery for Southeast Asia. Of course, talking about interconnection, that would be a main one, main issues that we need to think about, whether this source can be shared with neighboring countries. We already export to Kalimantan. We already connected to the grid, and we are going to export to Brunei and Sabah as well. So I think that's the point that I would like to share. Thank you.
Right, thank you so much, panelists. I think we have quite a fair bit of questions actually coming in from our audience today. Perhaps we can take a few of them before we move on with the rest of the discussion. Now, there is a question actually on carbon recapture and storage priority. The question is very much, is carbon recapture and storage a priority for the companies represented by our panelists here? Perhaps, Raj can start.
Yeah, sure, I can take this. So I think carbon capture is a very good subject to actually today look at. The entire move towards the green hydrogen derivatives is something which will now, when we talk about methanol, when we talk about some of these which are actually which needs carbon as an element, essential element within their molecule, I think this carbon capture will become a much better or much more real. Today, there is an effort which is being done with respect to let's capture carbon and actually store it in some manner where it does not emit and all of that. But I think the real economy of carbon capture will start when we are looking at real use case. So as we move towards the green hydrogen economy, some of the derivatives actually need carbon to be captured from the environment, and that could be a nearby thermal plant which can actually give that carbon, and actually you can capture that carbon and use it in some of these derivatives. So we will be able to have real move happening in this as we move towards green hydrogen. So I think from that perspective, it becomes a reality, and as part of Adani Group, we would be doing that as in our green hydrogen initiative. We have already announced the initial 1 million ton of green hydrogen project, one of that part will involve capturing carbon from one of the thermal station, coal-based thermal station, actually being captured and actually being used in the production of derivatives. So that's a very, very good and novel and practical way of achieving carbon capture. Instead of, I would rather say today, carbon capture requiring an economic push from, or some kind of a subsidy or some cost being imposed on some customer finally. So instead of that, this green hydrogen movement will actually give that impetus on its own. So that's one on the carbon capture. And storage, I think the second question was regarding storage.
Yeah.
So the storage part, I think, is very, very important. And as I said, like, India has chosen both paths, whether it is pump storage or battery storage. Okay, so while battery storage is actually costly from ASEAN perspective today, and when mixed with renewables, we are talking about 4 cents odd or 3.5 cents. Battery storage is still 10, 12, 13 cents. So obviously the mix of battery storage with the renewables can bring the overall cost down of the power, which is more firm, but at the same time, still it is costly. So, and given the recent issue around how the prices of some of the base commodities has gone up, it has actually pushed the adoption of storage for, if not less, at least by a couple of years for ASEAN countries, which look at the overall economics of power. There, I think a staged approach where we use the pump hydro or hydro as a mixing or storage opportunity actually helps. So at least countries like India is now pushing pump storage significantly. The best part about pump storage is it really does not need water after the initial charge. It just need a makeup water. So it does not necessarily create any strain on the water availability in the area after the first fill. So from that perspective, you just need a good terrain to be able to do this. And I think organizations like Adani have taken that initiative, at least I can say in India, where gigawatts of such capacities will get deployed over the course of next 7 to 8 years, because pump storage provides a 100-year alternative on the storage side compared to probably a battery storage, which is 8 to 10 years in a best case. So more sustainable way of mixing renewables in the grid is probably these kind of initiatives. So from a government side, they have been pushing that. So I think this is my view around, or our view around how these two will evolve going forward.
Right, thanks. What about Engineer Erwan, your thoughts on this? I think the initiatives in Sarawak on hydrogen.
Yeah, thank you. That's why in terms of solution, we need to look at where we are, and it's all about risk and opportunity where we can move forward strategically in the future. Of course, cost will be a main issue, either hydrogen or storage and so on. Just that we need to understand where we are in terms of, for example, Sarawak Energy, in terms of our emissions, how big is our emission, and what sort of solution that we can adapt to really reduce this impact. Of course, another metrics to it will be the cost and social and environment part of it. We need to look at holistically on this 3 main criteria. That's why for our projects, we also have a carbon capture project and carbon storage in one of our power plant. It's a pilot R&D project for now. Carbon storage and algae, for example, one of it is under our R&D. So for us, yes, we are able to reduce for the past 10 years, 72% of our grid emission intensity. So the next will be adopt all this low carbon technology to our system, how we can reduce it, not only on the supply side, but also on the demand side as well, on the behavior or consumption. We try to work together with our supply chain, how to reduce it further. So I think it's all about picking the right solution for the right business case for us. Yeah, thank you.
Right. What about Kontitipon? Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, when we're talking about this carbon capture, right? Currently the cost-wise, right, probably on the high side, and So in terms of the companies or the private sector, normally they would look at the combination of like hydrogen, carbon capture, carbon storage, just like PTT Group, right? Since we have quite a long integrated supply chain. For example, PTT EP, right? They do exploration, but in the futures, right? Some of the gas, in the Gulf, right? Probably depleted, and so they take these opportunities, right? To use that as the storage, right? For the carbon. So when we do all this, right? Together as a group, right? Even the current cost of this carbon capture technology is still quite, I would say expensive, right? But by doing all this together, hopefully we could achieve the economy of scale, right? And so that's why it makes sense for the business, right, to consider this carbon capture, carbon storage, right, as part of the solution for the net zero or ESG target. But as I said, right, it's not just like one single solution. In parallel, right, we're talking about renewable, but at the same time, right, we need to have the storage as well, because storage technology could address the reliability of the power supply, especially for the industrial users. So these are just some of the area that we talking about. But in the future, probably people talking a lot more, right, in other area like nuclear power plant, whether that's considered to be part of the solution or not, right? So this is just some example.
Yeah. Did you use yourself?
Yeah, hi. Looking at carbon capture and storage, I'll address the capture part first. I think there are a few studies that we have conducted within the TNB group in terms of capturing carbons, especially from the thermal plant. And I think part of the study was utilizing the carbon for algae cultivation. So, you capture the carbon, and obviously photosynthesis requires carbon for the process. So you utilize that back, and algae presents another line of business, to the pharmaceutical and a few other lines that it can contribute to. However, the large amount of carbon emission that comes, relatively large, comes from the thermal plants, resulting to this utilization having, sizing commercial viability issues. However, there are, I think, as we go, obviously there will be technological advancement to this, and hopefully, a few other applications can be identified for the utilization of the carbon that is being captured. When you talk about storage, it's a bit, specifically to the Peninsular Malaysia situation. As we all know, most of the economic activity are happening on the west side of Peninsular Malaysia. That's where most power plants are, anyways. And the carbons that are being emitted are actually on this side of the country, whereby we have our oil fields on the other side of the country, on the eastern side. So storage will become a bit of an issue. It is ideal if we have onshore storage or oil fields that can cater for storage option. But I do not foresee storage potential. Although there are options of either, having pipelines being established to transfer the carbon, or even capture it and then transfer it through ships to the other side of the country. But at this moment, I think it's just, commercially might not make sense at the moment. However, in the long run, these are some decarbonization efforts that I think we as a society, as a country, needs to consider, obviously.
Right. Thank you so much. The next question we have from our audience is interesting to the panelists. Question is, any thoughts or any views on the potential of nuclear energy in this part of the world, in ASEAN specifically? The audience says that how he is trying to gauge or comprehend how something that can be so damaging to the people, environment, can be considered as sustainable. What are your thoughts on that? Essentially, I think what we have seen is the example in France. France have actually, for example, they generate about 2/3 of energy from electricity, from nuclear, and it has also enabled the country to share or to export to Europe. Your thoughts on this? Thank you. Anyone to jump right in?
Yeah, sure. So if I may, I think the question tells what the issue is basically what is the public perception around nuclear. I believe in terms of safety, yes, there have been incidences, and every time someone says that the new technology is more safe, and when you find there's another thing which happens in every 10, 15, 20 years, which has a long-term impact, actually creates this perception thing, because it is there coming from the facts. And that is where you find governments not being able to take that step that easily. You really need a strong political establishment to be able to adopt renewables in a large scale. While there is huge development happening on the technology side for renewables, now we are also talking about smaller scale adoption, which can actually generate power for us at a smaller capacity, make it more available for remote areas. But at the same time, the issue would always be is the people, would they be comfortable having a nuclear plant in their backyard? So that has remained an issue. And while organizations like us have been continuously exploring what best can work in a given metrics of energy mix, but adoption of renewables, adoption of nuclear has actually always had this question. And every new plant which is announced in any part of at least I can talk about India, will see that first protest coming in, that no, not in my backyard. However safe the technology could be, however development can that be. So I think it will take significant time before people forget about old stories. If you talk about Chernobyl, okay, people could forget Chernobyl after 30, 40 years, and that too because it was not in ASEAN. You had a recent incident which happened in Japan, which is supposed to be a much safer country in terms of adoption of nuclear. So these memories are not that easy to remove. And that's where the inhibition comes from adoption by the public. And if there is an issue there, then the governments cannot necessarily move ahead irrespective of that public view. I think that has been an issue. I think in terms of moving safer and safer, we know that there were some issues in some man-made issues in the earlier ones. The technology is actually evolving to make it more and more safe. We have a lot of examples where nothing has happened for years together, but one single incident actually creates that thing. So I think nuclear has been in that two extremes being thought, and then that's where you have the issue coming in, while it can be a very good source.
Right, thanks. I think during our discussion before this session with Encik Yusrizal, he has his views on this, strong views, I believe. Encik Yusrizal?
Yeah, sure. I think before I start, I must make this very clear. It's a very sensitive issue, but I think we do need to have a serious conversation on this. And whatever I say is basically, my personal point of view, and does not necessarily be, how TNB view this. So with that being said, I think theoretically looking at nuclear, as a decarbonization technology, I think it is one of the most significant solution or option that could enable us to decarbonize. So we are talking about, replacing coal, and eventually gas will take over. So number one, to start with, and to go back to the three factors that we discussed earlier, nuclear will be able to counter the reliability of supply part, right? You take out a stable base load option like coal, then you would want to have another option and not to be solely heavily dependent on gas, which is also not good in terms of reliability, meaning in the meeting the reliability of supply. And when we talk about nuclear, and obviously, I mean, we cannot guarantee that the next thing that is going to happen is, what you call, people would like to say, fail-safe technology and whatnot. As things can happen and cannot be anticipated fully, this is something that we need to be aware of. And I think currently, in terms of the nuclear advancement, they are looking at SMR, small medium reactors, which are supposedly to be fail-safe and much safer, smaller in terms of the capacity. So I think in the long run, countries, nations need to seriously objectively look at the function or the role that nuclear energy can play, which I think obviously, coming from being a planner background, I do believe there is no single silver bullet that will be able to save the issues. So obviously I'm promoting renewables, which is okay, which is good. I think we need to have more and more renewables, but over time, there's also a need to ensure that we have a option for base load to meet the base load demand capacity and able to contribute in a reliable and very stable manner. So that's my take on nuclear. I think serious considerations need to be made because nuclear will be able to address the decarbonization needs of countries. We are all saying that we are going towards net zero. Hence, there's a serious consideration that we all need to think and do it objectively and do it correctly, because this is something that you do not want to, like what you can say, you do not want to play with.
Something so damaging. Thank you so much. What about Kun Titipon, your thoughts on nuclear?
Yeah, I think as we discussed, right, we need to explore all the options available in the market so we could achieve our ESG target. Anyhow, right, for the nuclear power plant, right, this is something probably more for the longer term, like, rather than immediate or medium term plan, because we need to have all aspect of readiness in terms of perception, in terms of technology, and also in terms of the legislation frameworks and all those, right? Not only business sector people, but for the government as well, right? How can we all prepare all this, right, before deciding to have the nuclear technology?
Yeah, fully agree with whatever been highlighted. In fact, it should be based on the short-term and long-term needs and what sort of technology that can meet that needs, be it baseload, be it variable renewable energy, and so on. So there are a lot of opportunity and risk as well toward each of these technology. So we need to really explore and really optimize what we have. Then, but the long-term part, we also need to focus on it and try to understand what sort of challenges, if we feel that in the future this will be the requirement for this region. Thank you.
So thank you so much. Mindful of the time, we have time for just probably just one more question from our audience today. We have this very interesting question about recent events and setbacks in if at all. The question is, amid the energy crisis today due to the war and geopolitical tensions in the region, the European countries are actually switching back to coal plants, all right, to ensure energy security. So do you foresee this trend where countries backtrack on their green energy plans to continue? And how will this affect the global net zero aspirations? I presume the timeline. Your thoughts on this? Titipon, you want to start?
Yes, on these issues, right? Understand that, right? In Europe, right? Even they probably restart the coal plant, but understand that that's kind, really, efficient plant with really clean coal, technology, right? I think that's what we understand. Even, in terms of the energy security issues become more and more important in Europe, given the current tension between Russia and Ukraine. But in terms of the development of the renewable, right, it's still, moving forward, right? Probably, a bit slower pace, right, during the past year or two, right? But, at the end, right, we think, right, they will try to keep up, on this ESG or, net zero, target. And actually, in terms of the investment, based on what we have seen, right, the pace of the investment in this renewable space, right, it's still there. It's not lower. In terms of pricing, it's not cheaper. I understand that with the higher interest rate, right? The competition, right, to get the new megawatt for this renewable, it's still very intense.
Right. Arwan?
Yeah, I think again, security, one of the main points that we need to understand, especially learning from the EU. So I think the industry need to be agile as well. If you look at the scenario now, I just come back from London and Portugal, just attending a carbon market conference. So you can see the cost of abatement by purchasing credits, the price is getting higher due to this event, because they anticipate that by releasing more, then they need to buy more in terms of offset, right? So that's the whole scenario now. I think definitely net zero will stay, because it's tied up to each country commitment under the UN, the Paris Agreement. Each country have their own targets to meet. Definitely this will cascade down to all of us, the corporates, the businesses. So then how are we going to achieve that? Definitely, if you emit more, then you need to pay more. Either carbon tax will be introduced, or either we can go to voluntary carbon market to offset our emission. So yes, whatever happened, it will. It's just a one event that disturbed the markets, but in the long-term part, the bigger targets or objective will be toward net zero. I think that's my take on that. Thank you.
Suraj?
Sure. I think two aspects of it. Yes, it's important to have energy, and that's where I think in the short to medium term we are looking at some of these alternatives uses, even though may not be in line with the net zero being switched on back. So I think that's okay, just because you do not have the gas coming from certain areas. So obviously need some other alternative sources. So that's one. And Sraman's point regarding the offset cost, actually promoting the renewables in some other form, some other part of the world is going to move offset probably that kind of a new growth in the coal-based generation. But I think what's more important, which is slightly more longer term, is actually pushing renewables a bit more than what it was happening earlier. If I remember right, close to 5 million ton of green hydrogen was a target earlier for renewables by 2030. That has been pushed to 20 million tons. just think about the kind of renewables adoption we are talking about. This means 120,000 megawatts or 25,000 megawatts of renewable required for serving that target. And that too by 2030. That is a huge target to be achieved. So from the perspective of actually moving towards net zero, this event has pushed that move from the point of view not only as a target based on climate, but based on the necessity, because you don't have the gas available. So you need to now look at other ways of actually having that energy source being replaced. So while the mix may change differently than what we had thought, but I think it is only accelerating the move towards net zero, probably in a slightly different mix. And I think some of these events highlight that point, that let's look at the adoption of renewables in a much faster manner. Yes, today this move actually transitioned further in terms of adoption green hydrogen. And I think it is important also, this geopolitics also has given another impetus, which is actually look at supply chain security, not only for the gas per se coming out of some countries, but also look at the solar equipment coming out of some countries. So I think this move, what we are seeing in adopting alternative fuel, which was coal, is only a knee-jerk reaction of actually having something which is available in hand. But what it will transition into is a much better adoption of renewables, diversification of resources, energy resources out of traditional areas, whether it is gas being replaced with green hydrogen derivatives or solar modules being made outside one country where it is being made on 90%. So I think that's something which is what this will move, because you can't make your country starving for energy based on the whims and fancies of certain other countries. That's what is being highlighted very much in this particular event. And that's what has crippled the last 2.5 years. And there was no solar modules available to deploy. US was not even able to import full modules, forget about adopting renewables. So is the case with a lot of other places. So I think this precipitates into real energy security, and small moves like coal is fine in the near term, but actually it pushes that real move.
Thank you so much, Encik Yusrizal. Encik Yusrizal, I think you're on. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think you talk about the need. Somebody might back off due to the current prevailing condition, whereby the prices are through the roof. I think looking at this, it goes back to the need to balance the three factors that we discussed earlier. So it's not, looking at the short term, obviously there are very limited options to address this, but I believe going renewable is one of the options that could enable us to mitigate this high fuel prices or high commodity prices in the long run. But I believe looking at the need to balance the three, and obviously there will be additional costs at the beginning in whatever technology that we adopt. But going in the long run, having the big picture on where we are going, having or meeting the net zero target, I believe it's required. So countries need to be looking at this from a long-term point of view, and whatever solutions to cushion, especially the impact to the economy in terms of the fuel price increase, whatnot, needs to be addressed, obviously. But in the long run, there needs to be a change of the way we do things. So thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, everyone, esteemed panelists. Mindful of the time, it's now about 11:06. I need to pass the session back to Seng Yao. But before that, thank you so much to Mr. Raj, Kun Titipon, Encik Yusrizal, and Encik Irwan. Over to Seng Yao.
Thanks, Chuan. And a big thank you also to the panelists for a terrific round of insights and your sharing. We hear from you that while the context of renewable energy adoption differs slightly from country to country, The message is crystal clear that it is paramount that the world needs to double up exploring all modalities to fast-track transition. Before we end the webinar, we would just like to take a quick 2-minute poll from the audience. Your responses will be greatly appreciated because your feedback will go into our ESG research in the coming weeks. So with that, may I just invite Elisa to run the polls, please?
Sorry, Elisa, you may be on mute. Sorry, well, I understand that the poll is actually ongoing and people are answering. So it will close in 15 seconds or probably in 10 seconds. Perhaps Elisa can show the results. Yep, here we are. 10 to 15 years, majority. 15 to 20 years, about 1/5, another 1/5 immediately. All right.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Johan. Thank you, Elisa. In closing, a huge thank you again to all of our valued clients and the panelists for participating in today's show. We would just like to take this opportunity to also remind everyone that we will be hosting a 4th webinar on the ESG conversation series on the 24th of August. And that conversation will focus on sustainable finance, where we see the shift is already happening and gaining fast traction. With that, on behalf of Maybank, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you again at the next session. Thank you and have a great day ahead.